This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. The UK's quarantine laws were only announced last week. They're supposed to come into force next Monday, but already the Evening Standard's learned a rebellion by MPs has seen Downing Street aides draw up plans to ease them. It follows the aviation and tourism industry saying the rules as they stand would ruin any hope of recovery during the summer. Our editorial column thinks the laws should be ditched.
There has been an escalation of the backlash against the government's quarantine plans, which will require everyone arriving in this country to self-isolate for 14 days or face a potential £1,000 fine. Conservative MPs and industry leaders are now among those calling for an urgent rethink. They are right to do so because, as the Evening Standard pointed out the moment that this deeply foolish idea was announced by Home Secretary Priti Patel, the proposed restrictions are ill-judged on all counts. The truth is that there's been no coherent explanation of why effectively shutting our borders to incomers, which is what the quarantine plan will largely do, will improve public health. And the reason is that there isn't one. Instead, the reality is that the easing of lockdown restrictions here brings greater hazard than arrivals from overseas will do. On top of this, there's the economic damage of quarantine to consider. Airlines and travel companies will be obvious victims, while there will be an inevitable further overall hit to the nation's finances, for no good reason. The truth is that the quarantine plan is all about posturing, not effective science. It should be ditched now.
Well, the Evening Standard's Jonathan Prynn's been talking to people in the aviation industry. And Jonathan, what do they make of these rules?
Well, they absolutely hate it. They're worried that it's sending a signal to the rest of the world that Britain is closed for business, certainly from a tourism point of view, for the entirety of the summer. And, I mean, the aviation and the sort of tourism industry are already working on the assumption that there will be zero incoming tourists into London this year. And also, it makes it very hard for people to plan their normal summer holidays because they don't know whether or not they're going to have to hide away at home for a fortnight when they get back, which obviously has massive practical implications for work and so on. So, yeah, generally very unhappy.
Has the government fully explained why these quarantine laws are needed, especially now after so long since lockdown began and now the restrictions are easing?
I think the feeling is that, in essence, they haven't. There's been some slightly vague talk about the need to prevent any risk of a second wave, but they haven't really explained the thinking behind it, given that most of the rest of Europe, which is essentially what we're talking about over the summer, has much lower infection and death rates than we do. So, if anything, they should be keeping us out, not the other way around. So, I don't think there's any clear explanation of why this is necessary, why they think it's essential to carry on reducing the threat from COVID within the UK. And of course, it's going to have monumental economic knock-on effects.
On those economics, Jonathan, the travel industry, the aviation industry have been really badly hit by coronavirus. Was there hope that there could be some signs of recovery soon?
I don't think they've given up on that. Given that schools, which of course go back today, don't break up, or state schools don't break up until pretty much the end of July, last week of July, I think they still hold out hope that they'll be able to salvage quite a decent chunk of their summer business. And certainly all the indications are that people are very keen to get away to their usual favourite destinations, Spain and Greece and Italy in particular. I think they feel that there is a market there still. It just needs to be untapped. And at the moment, because of the uncertainty and because of the threat, or in fact the pledge to introduce this quarantine rule, people aren't making the bookings. They just don't know what the situation is going to be when they get home. I think the minute that quarantine rule is relaxed or reversed, I think you'll see an absolute flood of people booking in to go to the Costas, the Greek islands, all the places that they would normally be heading to during the summer.
And do you feel like these quarantine rules can survive through the summer, or are you expecting a U-turn soon?
There is absolutely massive pressure on the government to reverse this decision, both from the tourism industry. There's a letter from 200 very, very senior tourism figures gone out to Downing Street saying that it's going to destroy the sector this summer and have massive long-term implications. Other countries are lobbying the government to relax these rules. I mean, bearing in mind that Britain is the biggest market for many countries, Spain, or one of the biggest, Spain, Italy, France, Greece, and so on. So they're desperate to get Britons there spending their money again. Also, the backbench MPs are now lobbying Number 10 as well, putting a lot of pressure on. And there is some suggestion, there are some noises emerging from Number 10 that the Prime Minister's chief strategy advisor, Sir Eddie Lister, is sympathetic to an alternative scheme on the basis of air bridges, which would allow people to fly to certain destinations that are determined or to be clear or have enough safety systems in place to make it fine for people to go out and come back on those particular routes. I suppose it's analogous to the government taking a view on security at certain airports. They prevented people going to Sharm el-Sheikh for a long time because it felt the security there wasn't stringent enough, and it's the same with health security. So I suspect we will see a limited number of air bridges emerging quite soon, and the blanket quarantine requirement probably being relaxed before it even comes in.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.